Greetings everyone. This episode of Close to the Bones is with beloved community elder, artist, writer, poet, Order of Australia recipient for services to the artistic community and activist for love, Nina Angelo. It was recorded in the lounge room of her colourful home, complete with the sounds of family life and birds upon the beautiful Darkingyang land of the Central Coast. The last 2 episodes have captured the stories of war and its aftermath. All the women so far, including Nina, have experienced the intergenerational pain of these experiences. What they have in common is their ability to bring through the light of hope, beauty and love for the next generations through their generous optimism. As Nina's story is so large, we are releasing it in 2 parts. Part 1 is Nina's origin story. Part 2 will include her creative life as a community textile artist and the journeys that take her all around this country, from Indigenous communities to the islands of Fiji and beyond. For a deep dive into this colourful, delightful and big-hearted creative woman, I highly recommend her book, Don't Cry, Dance. This conversation with Nina begins with her sharing her poem, The Elder.
She, the elder. An elder is a jewel, a diamond in the rough. She understands the life she's led, in joy and also strife. An elder comprehends the pain of growing wise, because she's had that same experience in her joy and in her strife. An elder does not judge or criticize your worth. She is all wrapped up in patience and understands your birth. The elder, she will carry the wisdom of her years. During that time, the elder will remember all those tears that she has shed so many times during her time on earth. Her tears could fill an ocean from the beginning of her birth. An elder never whinges all challenges she meets. This way the learning happens, those challenges she beats. Her eyes have opened up and clarity is here. She's walked in joy through pain and fire, ascending and seeing clear. She holds so closely to her heart all who need her solace. She feels their hurt without taking it on, but sits firmly in her space. An elder listens deeply to the stories shared with her. In turn, she shares her stories, while inside her words they stir. I am an elder now. I've shed so many tears, decades of love, children and joy, and pain throughout the years. Adventures, travel, and discomfort, rising above all that, which blocked my way, in love I stay, and never ever look back. I soar with love, I soar without fear. I am in service now to that great Creator, the breath in our life, and with my exit I will take a bow. When the call comes in, the time will be right to surrender and to trust. My farewell will be joy, returning to source, and I will just be dust. While my heart will explode, my journey complete, returning to the oneness from above, being one in pure joy, to return once again and shine the light of love. It's my poem.
That was so beautiful. It's so beautiful to be here in your lovely home, Nina, and to be welcomed by you and your lovely hospitality, as we say in Greek, philoxenia, friend to stranger. I believe this week marks the 100th birthday of your beloved mother, Yanka. Is that how you pronounce her name?
Yeah.
If she had still been here, she'd be 100 years old.
Wow.
And even though you're a woman of so much life experience, so much story, so much creativity, it feels right that we honour that and begin our journey together with your mother out of respect to her.
With joy. It would be a joy for me to do that and welcome you. into my home. Thank you.
Thank you, Paristo. So, Nina, can you give us well, it's hard to use the word synopsis, isn't it, for a life, but give us a sense of what your roots, where do you come from? What has made the Nina now? Where did that story of Nina emerge from?
I guess I always believed I came from the stars in the first place. That's something I've lived with all my life. But I was born in Athens, in Greece. My mother was a Polish Jewish girl, and my dad was a Greek Sephardic Jewish man. They met in Auschwitz in the camps, and they'd lost everybody apart from 2 uncles and my grandfather, who they found. They met again in Paris as refugees in the Red Cross canteen when the war had finished. My dad in Auschwitz had made a pass at my mother. She was 16. Yes, I said he was 16 years older than her. He was a very elite prisoner in Auschwitz. He was in a commando called the Canada Commando, and they were the only prisoners that were on the platforms when the trains came in, and their role was to go into the trains and collect everything that people had brought with them. And therefore they had food. They had everything that they needed to sustain themselves. And he made a pass at my mother with some food, and she was a young, traumatised girl. She was only 16 when the war broke out and was on the run. And that's how she knocked him back.
Wow. Well, firstly, how did your father come from, did you say Thessaloniki?
Yes, Thessaloniki.
And your mother from Poland?
Yes.
They were transported
Separately. Totally. Yes.
And they met in the horrendous experience that we know of as Auschwitz, which is a concentration camp. And I say that because I know a lot of the young audience that may be listening are unaware of this history that we all take for granted.
Yes.
These were extermination camps. And your mother and your father both survived their ordeals there.
Yes.
What are the chances that they should meet in Paris without the internet that we're so used to now, without the speed of connecting and knowing where everybody is?
Look, this is I think God works in mysterious ways, or Goddess works in mysterious ways, source, creator, the angels, whatever. But it was meant to be. My father spoke 13 languages between them, my parents. And my father spoke all the Turkish, the Spanish, the old ancient Spanish. My mother, the Greek, French. That was a big common language. My mother, she spoke the Russian, the German, the Polish, and she also knew French. So when they first met, it was the common language that they had was French. It is quite incredible that first they both survived after he made the pass. They went their ways. They didn't know if they were going to be around, or they'd forgotten each other. She was hoping that her father would still be alive, and her brother, she just didn't know. It happened that she did find her brother, and when she was in Paris, and my father, I don't know why he went to Paris. It's in my book, but he ended up in Paris too. And there's the beautiful love story of how they re-met there when my mother was just in rags with one of her friends from the camp, and after they'd registered them and gave them the papers, whatever, because they had nothing, she asked where the Allied headquarters were, because she knew they would have been in Paris, and she went with her friend to the Allied headquarters, and the man that she saw there, he knew her father. And he said, he's alive, he's in London. He was being he was a doctor, so was my grandmother a doctor. So he was being retrained as a physiotherapist. He'd lost his sight during the war. And so he said to her, I will get on to him and let him know that you're here. That was such a joy for her. And he turned to her, was in rags, and her friend, and he said, "Please take this." And he handed her 10 English pounds. He said, "Go and buy yourself some clothes, some underwear, whatever you need." And my mother said, "Oh, I couldn't take it." And he said, "Listen, I know your father. He would do exactly the same if it was my daughter. Please take it." So she thanked him, left with her friend, and they were walking down this little lane in Paris. And all of a sudden she comes to this shop. And in the shop, it was a dress shop, was a mannequin. And on this mannequin was this beautiful teal blue dress. And she stopped and looked at it. This is like the antithesis for everything they had experienced and where she was. And she just looked at this dress and she said to a friend, "Oh, I just so want that dress." And her friend said, "Yanka," that's her name, "you're crazy. We have no underwear. We have nothing. This could get us something make us a bit more comfortable." And my mother said, you're right, you know. So they walked off down the road a bit, down the lane, and she stopped and she turned to her friend. She said, "Listen, we didn't even know we're going to survive. We don't know what's ahead. We've just been through hell. I want that dress."
Wow.
And so they went back to the shop and she went in and she tried on this beautiful teal blue dress, which has always been her favourite colour. And she felt like a princess. And she walked out of that shop wearing that dress. And that night she went into the Red Cross canteen in Paris that was set up specially for the Holocaust survivors, the refugees, and she walked in wearing the dress, and my father was there, and he saw her, and he went up to her, and he said, "Don't I know you from somewhere?" And she said to him, "Oh, stop it, I know you," all in French. He said, "I know you men, you would say that to all girls." And she went to walk away. And then he said, "Isn't your name Janine?" Janina, which is a Polish name. And she stopped, and that was it. That's 16 years difference in their ages. They got engaged in Paris on Bastille Day. He said, you know, they said in their writing, you know, there was fireworks and everything, and they fell in love in Paris.
It is very fairy tale, isn't it?
It really is.
And when you speak about her walking away from the dress and then having that aha moment to return, I see already the beginnings of Nina's spirit right there in that moment.
Yep.
That creative energy, you know, despite hardship, despite everything, that dress meant more than a icon of fashion.
Oh.
It meant something to her.
More than underwear.
Yes.
More than anything.
Yes, and her dignity and the way she could feel wearing that dress, and that instigated a whole love story there.
It really did.
I just want to go back a moment when you
Yes.
mentioned about you believe that you came from the stars. Is it okay to share a little bit about that? Because it seems to me that you've chosen this family lineage to enter into this human plane to bring through something out of pain and trauma, and to bring through the light of beauty, colour, love.
Yeah.
Do you want to respond to that?
Yes, well, I do, because I've always known inside of me, you know, when people question you, particularly when you're a bit out there and, you know, a bit different, they question it, but I have never questioned where I came from. And I understand now. I was their first new life. They'd lost everybody, apart from 2 uncles. They lost them all. And so I came into the world with lots of curly hair and like I'm here. I always had an optimistic outlook on life. I always enjoyed life. I always laughed and just had love in me and, you know, managed to deal with just about anything.
So what I'm hearing through all of this is something I've never thought of before, which is that first generation that have come through after the war is hope, that generation brought through hope. And if I look now it's helping me look at my own story through different eyes, through the massacre my mother witnessed. And for those that haven't heard, her story is on episode 1. But I've been a light of hope
for your mother,
for my mum.
Yes,
and that's to create a beautiful, good life, to provide you with the things that can make all the elements of a good life, which included migrating to Australia. Yes, so Nina, you were born in Athens.
Yes.
So your parents found their way back to Greece?
Well, my mother was in London. They managed, after the war, it wasn't easy to go from one country to the other.
No.
Everything was locked down.
And infrastructure wouldn't have been there.
Absolutely. I mean, and there were refugees everywhere. Red Cross was set up all over the place. My father he had a business in Greece, in Athens, and a partner called Eliko, who was also a Jewish Greek man, but he wasn't taken. He kept their business going. My dad was an importer, and so they had a really good business in Athens. They would import anything. In the book he says, we even imported the condoms. I remember him saying that, everything, lights, you name it. He had people and agents in all through England and America and all through Europe, because he was a real canny businessman, and he'd built up all these relationships over the years. So his best mate, Eliko, his partner, kept the business going. Dad rang him from France, and Eliko said, come back, Albert. The business is doing well. Your apartment is here. Everything you need is here. Come over. But in the meantime, he had married my mum in London, just for him to marry her in London was a big thing. They were the first concentration camp refugees to be married in London. My dad managed to get to Greece, but he couldn't get my mum over to Greece. It was almost impossible, and they wanted to send her back to Poland, but they were married, and he would never give up. He was quite intimidating, my dad. When he got angry and nobody could push him, he'd pull up the numbers on his arm, pull his sleeves up, and nothing would ever stop him. And so he knew some people in high places, like generals in the army, because he dealt with them all and they really liked him. And apparently the German government, as part of their reparation to Greece, what had happened, they gave a big boat, a ship, to Greece. And somehow through a whole way, my father managed to get my mother on this ship, and there was only her and the wife of the captain who was on it. And that's how she ended up in Athens.
Wow, there's a lot of persistence there.
With me in her belly.
Oh, right.
Remember, the war finished in 45, middle of 45.
Yeah.
I was born in early 47. I would have been in there in her belly.
So you were conceived in London then?
I reckon I must have been.
That's amazing. You know what's interesting, hearing this perspective of the story? I'm going to refer to some words that really touched me by Dr. Clarissa Pinkola Estes, which she speaks about living in atrocities aftermath. We hear a lot of the stories of the horrors of the war, but we don't have this personal lens to look through of how did it look like for people after that? How did they survive? How did they connect? How did they form family? And through your story and stories like with Jackie in the previous podcast and my mum, I'm getting a much more personal story of what that looks like. Yeah.
Yes, and that's really important, those stories within the big story. So my mum turns up in Athens with me inside her, and she's going through all her post-traumatic stuff. I mean, there was no counselling, there was nothing like that. She just experienced the worst hell that's imaginable. She's come through, my father too, and so it was only her and my father that understood what they'd gone through. She spoke no Greek. She didn't know anybody. No one knew her. And so they spent a lot of time. And so I would have taken on a lot of that while I was inside of her.
While you were in the womb.
All her grief, all her losses, everything. We realise that now.
Yeah.
And so when I was born, she was in the hospital. She couldn't speak, as I said, the language. She did learn Greek, and we ended up speaking Greek at home. We had to speak Greek at home, even my Polish mother.
So that was encouraged by your father?
Absolutely. He said, in this house is Greece and we speak Greek. And that's what we had to do. And my mum, she was really good and fluent, cooked Greek. She had the Chelaminde. I remember what's that called, the book, the Greek cookbook?
Oh.
The old Greek cookbook.
Oh, goodness.
Chelaminde.
And that's why you're such a good cook.
Well, I did pick up from her a lot. Being a Polish girl, I didn't realise, imagine, you're born to this Polish mother who's cooking Greek and speaking Greek at home, but she'd speak with my father in French, and French was my first language. And so when I translated when we found my dad's story in Washington, in the Holocaust Museum in America, in the United States, the interviews were all in French. And I had to go and sit down, and because I don't get to speak it often, and forget. But if I'm in with French people in France and that, after a little while, things just come back to me.
It returns, that French neural pathway.
But the Greek is the big one. The Greek is like, I hear someone speaking Greek and I'm like that, or I walk into a Greek shop and I have to speak Greek,
Oh gosh, there's so many things I'd like to ask you. Yeah. Well, I just think about this one first. Now that you've opened up the door to your finding those documents about your father, can you share with everybody about what those documents were and what that journey was?
Yes, well, it all really started with my mum. As I said, my dad never talked about anything, what happened to him, and he used to call me a bit cuckoo, my dad, because he never really got me. He loved me, but he never got me. And, he was a Greek businessman, he was a hardened man. He was in the resistance. And so I was a bit flitty-flighty for him, but the love was there. So my mum, she sat and wrote a story for us because she had found a story that her dad had written. And it's in the book. She said, when you're young, it's all about you. You don't care about all that stuff with your father, your mother, and where they came from or anything like that. But she realised because her father had left some story, she needed and wanted to leave us a story about her life and her growing up. And so she sat down at the typewriter and she typed it up. I think she started typing it in the late 60s. And then it could have been earlier than that, because she said 20 years had passed and she picked it up again. And now she said, I'm the grandmother of 2 children, which are my twins. And then my sister had 2 kids too. And so she continued. And so she left this for us so that we knew who we were. Because when you have no family, no one to go to ask any stories, you don't know their names, you don't know anything.
So she was the story keeper of your family?
Well, she wrote them up until the time the Gestapo got her. And she could not do it on her own anymore. And it ended when the Gestapo caught her.
How do you mean? Was this later?
Yeah, so when they caught her in 1944, she was on the run. She was on the run, working. She was on false papers. She was just going from one place to another on false papers. And so she just to the point where, when she got to the point where the Gestapo had caught her, and it was her brother who gave her up, who felt terrible because he thought she'd gone where she was working, and she's up against the wall, and she said she couldn't write anymore. And I said to her, look, Mum, how about I interview you? We'll do an interview, like I'll ask questions and you can tell me so we can complete this. And she said, okay, but I kept putting it off because we knew she had this lymphoma, this cancer of the lymph glands, and didn't know how long she had. And I kept thinking subconsciously that if I did this interview, she'll die quicker.
Oh, yes, I understand.
I never realised it, but I kept putting it off and putting it off.
Yeah.
And in the end, my brother-in-law actually interviewed her, but her voice and that part of her story was burnt in my second house fire.
Oh dear.
So I've had 2 house fires. I lost her voice. I lost that next part of her story, but I didn't know that there was my father's story somewhere.
Yeah.
So I was just going to put what she had written and my story with hers to give to all the family. That's sort of how it started. And then I had a Greek couple come and visit me one day, and they went back and did some research, which I'm not real good at, online, and next thing they sent me an email and a link, and there was my father in French speaking about his life, and that's when we found it in the Holocaust Museum in Washington.
How extraordinary.
Yeah.
And how did it happen that his story had been captured in that way?
Because the Jewish Museum in Sydney, there's a professor who I know well now because they stamped my book. His name is Conrad Queet. He's an emeritus professor at the Jewish Museum in Sydney. He got together what he called the Conrad Queet collection. He is like world-renowned. He's of Holocaust studies. That's what he got his professorship for. And he sent a woman called Sophie Kaplan, who was working with him, to interview my dad. And she came in 1986, the year after my mum had died. And he was like really desolate, but she insisted. And she was an Ashkenazi woman. Now, the Sephardic Greek, hot-blooded Greeks, the Ashkenazi, the Hungarians, the Poles, the Germans, they're more the sort of in the cold, sort of very different. And, excuse me, she was an Ashkenazi. And she pressured him, and I could hear when I listened to the tapes when they sent it, he's banging the table and he was getting really upset. But then she prodded deeply because Conrad really wanted to get as much as he could because he was this elite prisoner in Auschwitz. There weren't many of them.
And he really needed to have that lens to add into that whole of that story.
That's exactly right, the whole story, and so that's why she came back quite a number of times and interviewed him. I know I didn't pay much attention. I knew she was coming, and he was going, she's coming again, sorry, that was Greek.
That's okay.
And but she pushed him. And if she hadn't, I wouldn't have.
So how did you come to have this record? Was it accessible to you?
Yes, because when I was at the Holocaust Museum in Washington, here's my dad talking, they sent me the link, so I got onto them, and I told them I'm his daughter. And is there any way that you could send me this audio tape so I can put it in my book? And they did.
How extraordinary.
Yeah, and then I went to Margaret River to Western Australia, and I sat for days. I was there for 7 weeks listening to my father in French telling his story over and over again. And because my French was so stale, I had to keep going back and remembering. There's one chapter, it was in English, one part that was in English. That is an amazing story. Can I just tell you that?
Yeah, please do.
I went back to Europe in 2016. I went back because I thought, I'll find when my grandfather, because I knew what happened with my grandfather. I know he died, I found out he died before the war. And to go to Thessaloniki and see if there was any family or anybody, at all. But I decided when I went to Europe that I was going to make it a forgiveness thing because I knew that I could not move on. And my mum always said, you must forgive but never forget. She was so wise. Forgive but never forget. And I thought, no, I've got to do this forgiveness and I've got to go. And so I went to Germany. The energy was really hard for me. Even the statues, the sculptures were all military and no one was outside. After being in Greece and everything, it was really quite hard. So I was going to get on the fast train and go to London. I don't know. So I'm on the train And I'm thinking, you know, where I'd just been, and all the people that were working on the train were all German until it gets to the border, and then the new staff come on to the next country. And I go into this little compartment on my own, and it had a table in the middle, and I went right over to the window. There was no one else in there. And I looked out the window, and I was just really feeling this whole effect of this country. And the train takes off, and it stops at the next station. And these two big German military police come into my compartment.
Oh my goodness.
With the whole uniform. And they said, you know, in German to me, and they sat on either side of the door. And I just went, oh my God. I felt inside me, the only thing missing was the swastika, you know, that's how I felt. And I looked out the window and I thought, I've got to do something to keep my mind busy here. So I thought, oh no, I'll listen to some music. So I got my phone and I'm going through my music, and I find this thing saying unknown artist, unknown album. Now look, I've had this in there for ages. I had no idea what it was, but it was in there. And I thought, I'll find out what this is. So I click on unknown artist, unknown album. I've got the headphones on. I'm looking out the window. These two blokes are there. And it's my father talking to me, telling the story in English about him on the cattle trains going up to the camps.
Oh my goodness.
Can you believe that? And he's on the trains. He's telling that story.
That's extraordinary. This is part of the fabric of synchronicity that I see at the beginning of the story all the way through, and it continues on into you. How powerful is that?
I was like in shock. You know, I'm thinking, here I am. I'm on German soil still, on this train, all the German staff, everyone, these two military police sitting at the end, and there's just me. And there's my dad, and he's telling the story of him on the trains, going to the camp, going to Auschwitz.
You know, it's interesting, a lot of people do the trauma work, and some people dive back into their trauma, some people find other pathways to work with it. But it feels to me that the universe gave you an opportunity to activate that trauma of the family line within you, so you could actually see it as the observer and give you an understanding, so from there you could actually do the forgiveness work. Is that correct?
I think you're absolutely right, and I think all of this was part of what was going on in me and what I've learned, you know, about our cellular memory and our intergenerational trauma, the epigenetics that we carry, and what happened after I finished the book. It's all that is a big part of it. I hadn't thought of it like that, but I remember, my God, you know what happened to me then? They stopped at the next station. The two military police gets out, and in comes this young boy. Okay, a young, you know, I say young, he would have been like in his 20s, a cool dude with his little phone. And the train starts going, and I think to myself, my brain was blowing. I thought, I've got to download what's just happened here. So I said, excuse me, and the man got up, and I said, I've got to go to the toilet. I thought, at least I can sit in there on my own, closed in, and just work through this one. And I did. And I come back into the compartment, and as I come in, the man stands up, and the table in the middle, as I'm going around, my knee comes out of its socket. And I fall back on the seat. My knee, like it come out. It's never happened before. And I'm lying there, and these people are going, are you okay? You all right? You know, my knee.
And they're tending you.
This young man, this is the big thing, the young German man, he said to me, I'm a sportsman. I know about these injuries. Please trust me. And I know how to help fix it.
Please trust me.
He did.
Please trust me.
I know, I'll help you fix it. And I put it out, and he came over, and he slowly moves it, and my knee goes back in.
It's interesting to hear that story. There feels like a really profound healing moment happened there. But I'm also got rattling around in my brain the phrase being brought to one's knees.
Yes.
Yes, I think in the hearing of your father, and that voice coming through right at that moment is extraordinary.
I can see it.
The synchronicity of spirit working together, something much greater than our human comprehension is going on there.
Yep.
But also too, I admire the way that you were able, within all of this emotional turmoil, able to physically remove yourself, to give yourself a little integration space so you could return back into the space. And in doing so, the whole experience happened with your knee, which then gave a whole other depth to this incredible story.
You get it here. I haven't shared that story very much at all.
Yeah.
It's just, I don't know, we talked about Germany and then it came to me, we're talking about my dad's story, and I said there's one part in English.
That's right, the English part.
And that was the English part.
And you were able to hear it so much clearer in a way than having to, be very cautious in understanding the French.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I would have missed it.
Yeah.
And that was him on the trains and the whole journey up to the camp.
Yes, and I just would like the listeners to know that the name of the book is Don't Cry, Dance, a memoir of war, love and forgiveness. And I'm going to fast track now into right up till this week now, like our recent moment where you've returned from another epic journey in a very different way, and you've called it your freedom journey.
That's right. After my fall down the stairs, after breaking my body, after the lymphoma, after I'd been stopped, the COVID in the middle of it all, everything had stopped all of a sudden. Even though my body isn't as strong as it was, my spirit is really big, and I just wanted to get back in my car on my own, not rely on other people. Since everything that happened to me, I'm so independent, and I've had everything. Like I can do anything. Nothing's failed. Nothing I've done has failed. I haven't learned how to do it. I just know. Just being independent. I've travelled all through this country on my own, going to the most remote and isolated communities, finding my way. That's where I get my mantra, which protected me, which I use often, and it really, I feel protected by it. And so having come down with this lymphoma, knowing that I may not even come through it, I really just went into a trust and surrender and went, okay, whatever's meant to be. But I also was very weak, and I was very reliant on my family. They were feeding me whatever I could eat. They were there. People were helping me. People were doing so much. They made me that beautiful coat over there. That it was, I just feel very enriched by it. But I was still relying on other people when I never had to before. Even things, us women, so independent. Remember at the beginning, people would ring and say, look, I've made a cake, I'll bring you over some, or I've made some soup, I'll bring you a bowl. And I go, no, don't go out of your way. I'm fine, I've got plenty of food. I learned the biggest lesson about people. That is their way of saying, I love you and I care about you.
And that's their way to give back to you so much of what you've gifted them.
Yeah.
Well, humility does bring us to our knees, as we spoke before.
Yeah.
When there does need to be that act of surrender and there's nothing else to be done and except to receive.
Yeah.
And each time I've come here, there's always been beautiful. You're surrounded by such a beautiful community of people.
So it's so amazing when they put on the 1st of January 2020 down at the lagoon, when they put on this big thing, and they came and got me, and I could hardly walk, and I was bald, I had no hair, and all my red curly hair was sort of such a big part of who I was.
Yeah.
And just they managed to get me. I had no idea that they were presenting me with that they had sat and made over weekends, all the women.
So what Nina's talking about is this extraordinary coat that the community have come together to add their little piece of love onto this beautiful garment as a way of expressing tangibly their love and care and appreciation for Nina.
All the women. I call it the magical coat of the healing hearts. So they presented it to me on that day down at the lagoon. And I was so overwhelmed with everyone's love around me, and they were all wearing the brightest colours and looked amazing. There were pennants, there was a big carpet down. I mean, it was just like this huge ceremony and a seat for me. I thought I was going to melt into a puddle of overwhelm, and I didn't know how to deal with it. And it was the first time I did the channeling here. Because my head was totally bald. I'd lost all my hair, everything, and I was so overwhelmed. And then all of a sudden I felt this thing inside me, and I got up and I said to them, you know, us women are so good at giving and we're so lousy at receiving. And I realised then, and I said, so many people offered this and that and the other. Never ever knock back an offering, because I realised there and then that that's pure love that they're giving you. In the shape of a cake, in a bowl of soup, in a piece of bread.
Absolutely.
In whatever. Never knock it back. Never say, oh, I'm fine. Because it's their way of saying, I love you and I just don't know what else I can do for you, but this is just letting you know.
That is so beautiful. I can see you there with the loss of your flaming curls that would have identified your creative presence in the world. But yet now you're wearing this garment filled with colour and love. And when you describe the scene that you've just described with all the colour everywhere, that's what you bring into everyone's life, and everyone could bring that colour back in for you to receive. So you're an extraordinary community weaver, Nina.
They told me this. Look, I'm bringing me to tears now. They told me this, Nina, you've been putting out, and I go, but that's just what I did. I never thought of everything I did that of being anything. It just came so easy to me.
Yes, well, it was your gift. And when it's our gift, for some crazy reason, we don't seem to appreciate it because it comes so natural.
No, you do.
know. And so do you want to express what this year of freedom is about for you, what it looks like and what it looks like now, fresh back from a trip?
Because after my body was failing, you don't feel strong. For the first time I didn't feel strong because this physical body didn't feel strong. And so as it got stronger, I then decided I want to go without anyone with me. I just want to go and visit these people who I haven't seen for years, who love me, and I've spent time sharing stories. And so I worked it in such a way that I only did 3 hours, and found it so easy. I got a new car, it's an automatic. I always had a little manual before, and I'm free. And so from that year of freedom, I booked myself in to go back to Fiji for 3 weeks. I went up north for 2 weeks, stayed in places I didn't even know where I was going to end up. But when you truly give yourself to spirit and service, you just take on whatever is flung at you.
It just all unfolds, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
And I say now, if you have no expectations, you get no disappointments. It's only when you expect things and it doesn't work out the way you expect them. But when you have no expectations, everything is a joy.
We'll have to end part 1 here with Nina's words of joy. I have been listening to Nina's book, Don't Cry, Dance, as an audiobook. There is so much more detail from Nina's parents in their own words about their early life and the descent of Europe into fascism. In a similar way, the book is divided into 2 parts. The second covers Nina's personal history and creative life. She is such a good storyteller, painting us a picture with words of her amazing life journey. Hope you can join us for part 2.